Hello, everyone listening to the We Are Gamers podcast. As you may realize, this isn't the normal voice introducing you to the podcast. Justin is gone on a personal day, so right now I guess you could say, taking over hosting duties. This is Lawrence, and with me, as always, is Rident.
Hello.
And the lovely Team Benevolence, Michelle.
Hi.
And today we're going to go a little old school with this episode, where we're just going to talk about more retro gaming in regards to gaming before the PS3 and even a little bit before the PlayStation 2 generation, in regards to when we were younger, the games we were playing, some memories we had, just old school gaming in general. So Rident was streaming along our Twitch TV account, and he played a few PS1 games on the account. So Rident, tell us what experiences you had, if it brought back any memories, or, just in general the feel of how it was to play some of the older games again.
Well, most of them are, as expected, very, very slow and clunky. But it was kind of nice sort of jumping back into something I hadn't played in ages. Some of which I forgot I even had. It's just flicking through my box of PS1 games. I was like, I haven't played this in ages. I'll give that a bust. And one of the ones which I pulled out first was the Tony Hawk's Skateboarding, which is the first one, which is kind of in prep because you've got Tony Hawk's HD coming out next week, I think. Which did bring back a lot of memories, and I've now still got songs from the game stuck in my head. It had that effect back then, and it's done it all again. It seemed a lot tougher than I remembered it being. I guess it's just a complete change of controls and stuff, not using analog sticks and whatever.
Right. A lot of older games feel that way for me. If I were to try to go back to them, it feels like the controls are a little stiffer or harder than I remember.
Yeah. One of those I had biggest problems with, as you probably see if you do see the videos, was Tekken 2.
Yes, I saw that one. but to be fair, Tekken 2 was always hard, even back then, especially with Kazuya and the end boss.
But I used to be pretty good at it, and I was really surprised how much I struggled trying to play it. My thumbs were caning from using the D-pad as a direction, especially when trying to do diagonal directions, where you got your thumb in between the two buttons.
Yeah, I remember those. For some odd reason in Tekken, it felt harder to do the diagonal directions or anything like that, as opposed to like the 2D fighters, like King of Fighters or Street Fighter at the time.
That was probably the biggest struggle. I think Lawrence was looking at my Incredible Crisis. That was a funny game.
Yes. Yeah, I was laughing at that one because of the whole sequence where he's going down the street in a stretcher and you have to dodge the little hazards along the way.
Yeah, and you get these motorbikes coming at you and random cars just in the middle, from nowhere, in amongst all these other hazards that are sort of stuck in the way. Little signs. If you hit one of those, you can't control yourself for a little while, so you're not flying into a car and the guy's just screaming his head off.
Right. Something like that begs the question that I want to ask both of you. Do you feel games nowadays take less risks than they did back then in terms of design?
I think a lot of them do, and a lot of companies, especially the big guys, try to play it safe, and some of them try to get too serious too. And when they get too serious, or they just or a lot of focus is just done on visuals, kind of takes away a lot of the fun that you used to have with games.
Right, that is true. Michelle, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I suppose I can see the point for like the big companies, but then you'll always have like indie games and stuff like that. Like, I want to be the guy and stuff that are so sort of different from what you'd expect from like the big companies and stuff like that, I suppose.
So you think it kind of balances itself out with the big companies being ultra serious and the indie companies being the more quirky, the ones that are taking the big risks to get themselves noticed.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, then you have stuff like Capcom doing Okami HD. I really didn't expect that one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I thought Okami would probably have just been buried under a rug due to its sales, but Capcom at least still has confidence in the series for it to get an HD remake on PSN. So
Yeah, that was a bit of a surprise as well. I wasn't expecting them to dig Okami back out at all.
neither was I, honestly, especially with the recent, you could say, the word you keep hearing from Capcom side, the recent kind of kick they're on with Resident Evil and trying to promote that, and all of a sudden they announce Okami HD collection for September. Or Okami HD, excuse me, for September.
So that's one thing which I'm actually looking forward to picking up, because I think the screens that I've seen so far do make it look really quite nice. Little the little tweaks they've done on the HD coloring and polishing it up, etc.
Right, Okami HD looks amazing in the trailers that I've seen so far.
I mean, the thing when Okami came out, it was kind of towards the end of the PS2 period, and some people have already kind of moved on and off. So I guess that pretty much affected sales first time around.
Yeah. But then the Wii version came out, and the Wii version did, I think it did a little well, but it didn't do too well in regards to sales. And now Capcom's giving it a third chance to, sell itself, except this time you won't have to worry about not finding the game. Now it's going to be on a digital library that you can always just go to it and download.
Yeah, it's a lot nicer when you can, just. I mean, it's a pain in some respects because you're obviously filling up your hard drive, and sometimes it's quite nice to have your physical package. But like you say, you're not gonna have to get to a store and realise they've got minimal stock or they've got no stock left at all, and sort of miss out on it.
Right. So now you can just, you could say it's one of the blessings of a possible, you could say, digital future, in the sense of it'll always be there unless a license runs out, and depending on the game, a license will never run out. So that could be one benefit of it, and another benefit, especially from the PlayStation side of things, is the PS1 Classics and the PS2 Classics sections.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know how well they do. I mean, I know I've snapped up a couple of games from in those sections in the PSN, and some of which I did snap up before I realised that the PlayStation 3 does play PlayStation 1 discs, even though my version of the PlayStation 3 doesn't play PS2 discs.
Right.
So yeah, I've now got duplicates.
I made sure to look that one up before I bought anything, and then if I bought any PS1 game, I made sure it wasn't anything I already owned.
Well, I've now got God knows how many copies of each of the Final Fantasy games. I mean, it's bad enough I've got them. I've got them on PlayStation. I didn't buy into the original PC versions of Final Fantasy 7 or 8, but then I've got them on. I think I've got 2 copies of Final Fantasy 7 because I thought I lost one. I've now got it on digital version. I've got God knows how many copies of version. There's the Game Boy Advance version. I think that it covered. Yeah, that went and Final Fantasy 4 as well. That was on the I think it was 4. That was on the the Game Boy Advance as well as the PSP.
Right.
So that's another one I'm duplicating.
They made a ton of remakes for the Final Fantasy games.
I've even got Final Fantasy 1 and 2 on my iPhone.
And they made a PSP version of Final Fantasy 1 and 2 as well.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I've got those.
Is it possible for a company to be too remake happy?
Possibly. I guess I'm one of these people that they're targeting, the suckers. Uh,
You want every upgrade possible.
it's funny because I buy them and I haven't actually. I played the originals all the way through. I played the Game Boy Advance ones all the way through because the Game Boy Advance ones included some of the extra dungeons and stuff. But when it's come to the versions after those, I haven't really played them right the way through. I've only sort of grinded for a bit, and that's about as far as I went.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Sometimes you play the same game too many times, and it becomes, like you said, a grind, or you don't want to play it this time again, but you're like, I want to see what they changed.
Yeah.
Okay, so Michelle, I wanted to ask you, since I know you're a big fan of Square Enix games as well.
Mm-hmm.
When was your first Final Fantasy game? First off.
I was a bit late to the series. My first one was 10, actually.
Okay, your first one was Final Fantasy X. It's good, at least because now they're making a remake of Final Fantasy X for HD for PS3.
Well,
And Vita as well, yeah.
Well, yeah, they say they are, but versus 13, they also said.
I was gonna say they say they're making that too.
Michelle, do you feel with Square Enix, do you think they could do with, more targeted remakes in terms of HD remakes like Final Fantasy X, or as many people are begging and begging and begging for Final Fantasy VII remake? Or do you think that the less remakes, the better? Because we wind up with stuff like the Final Fantasy VII PC re-release that's coming out soon for Windows PC owners. Do you have any thought on that front?
I think it depends because there's games like one that have been remade so many times, and then you have 4, which has an obscene amount of remakes. But then it's 7 is probably their most famous game, and it's that is the game that kind of got them where they are today, sort of thing.
Right.
But they haven't done any sort of official remakes other than sort of re-releasing it for the PS and the PC, which seems kind of strange.
Right, and it doesn't look like they changed much of anything for the PC re-release that's coming out soon, from what I'm hearing.
I think that was the point, because the idea is they're not actually. It's not a remake. It's kind of a re-release, but it's got a few added things on there, including the old joke, the cloud saves.
Right.
And it's got achievements attached to it and things. Where it goes from there, I mean, you never know. It could end up being a game that gets ported onto, or a version of it gets put onto the PlayStation Network or something with achievements and stuff.
It would encourage other people to pick it up again and give it another go after all these years.
Yeah. And some people just sort of jump in and wonder, those that have been wondering what the hype's all about, to sort of jump in and give it a shot.
Yeah, that could go a long way for anyone who still hasn't introduced themselves to Final Fantasy VII.
I mean, for me, it wasn't my first Final Fantasy game, but it was the first one which really sort of had me really absorbed in it, and it was very different. It was all, at the time, it was 3D. What was then sort of the big 3D sort of era, and the backdrops were fantastic. Really detailed worlds and stuff. I mean, now it looks really dated, but at the time it was probably the best thing going.
Yeah.
Or near to. The cutscenes were fantastic. That wasn't my favourite Final Fantasy game, though, from the sort of earlier eras. I mean, my favourite along the line sort of goes down to Final Fantasy IX, mostly because I loved the world. The all the towns. There was a lot of interaction with the Moogles. You had the Chocobo Hot and Cold in there, and other mini games. You had really interesting characters, interesting looking characters and races and stuff. So that was probably what I liked. That was probably my favourite Final Fantasy game so far.
I feel Final Fantasy IX is very underappreciated as a whole.
Yeah.
Like, when everyone mentions their favorite Final Fantasy, it's usually 6 and 7.
Yeah.
But 9 doesn't get mentioned.
There's quite a few 8s as well. I mean, I know a fair few people who sort of favour 8 with a sort of semi-realistic setting in the colleges and sort of near human interaction, sort of human races and things like that.
Yeah, but Squall's a giant douche in 8. Seriously, it's like I picked up 8 for the PSN and it's like, okay, Squall's just being a giant dick. I really don't like him in 8. I mean, he's a lot better in Kingdom Hearts than the Dissidia, but I honestly don't know why people are like, oh no, it's not good enough for him. It's the other way around.
I don't know. I found that 8 did a few things right and then also took steps back in terms of the Final Fantasy series. Like, I don't understand the concept of drawing magic.
I didn't like that. That's one thing I didn't like when I went into that game.
Yeah, it's just one of those. I guess it's a nitpick, but at the same time, it's something pretty big when you go from an MP system like most traditional RPGs, or the materia system from FF7, and then you go into, stand in front of an enemy and draw, cure spells. It doesn't sound good when you're just standing there. You're like, okay, I'm gonna draw a cure spell off of this opponent.
And when you find the points on the maps that you can draw it out of, you end up like almost grinding, keep drawing magic for ages before you even sort of progress anything any further.
And then, not to mention that you need to sometimes use the magic, if I'm not mistaken, for other, things here and there. Like, if I'm not mistaken, I could have sworn you needed to use magic that you drew for some of the ultimate weapons in FF8. I could be wrong, but I remember you needing to use magic for some of the final weapons.
I'm trying to think if that was the case. Do you know, 8 it's been so long since I last played 8. Apart from playing the card game.
The card game was fun. I have to be one of the few who found the card game fun.
I liked it. And I like the one in 9 too.
Oh, not many people like the one in 9. I enjoyed the one in 8 from the bit I played of 9. The card game was kind of, I don't want to say off, but compared to 8, it just felt, 8 made it fun, but it was a grind. 9 just felt like a grind. I'll just put it that way.
Yeah, but at least it's not as bad as, Blinking Spear Break from 10-2.
10-2. 10-2 might as well have just been called Mini Game, the game. Or Side Quest, the game.
Now with extra costumes.
Yeah. And each costume gives you something different. While we're on the subject of Final Fantasy, do any of you have any favorite Final Fantasy moments you wanna share?
And there's always the big things. I mean, this is 7 always sort of kicks in with regards to the sort of moments, and there's always the sort of big moments, sort of going into the dream state with Cloud and the Gold Saucer was probably one of the best moments. It was fun, a fun little area. And raising the chocobo up to become a gold chocobo. That was a bit of a lengthy task, but
yeah, but it was worth it.
Yeah, and then you send it to the races and it wins everything.
Yeah. It's like, well, my gold chocobo is better than all your chocobos put together. Therefore, I win.
Yeah. And then there was in Final Fantasy IX. There was all the going around trying to find Stiltskin, the Moogle, traveling Moogle.
Right.
He was cool, and trying to find that hidden Chocobo Island up in the sky, which took me forever. Even though they said to use the clues, and there was something about the shadows and whatever, and I spent ages just trawling around the map trying to find where to shoot myself up into the sky.
And then eventually it's like, oh, this was it?
Yeah.
Michelle, do you have any favorite Final Fantasy moment or a memory from playing the Final Fantasy games?
I'd just say probably all of 10, apart from the Blitzball.
See, I didn't mind the Blitzball in 10. It was 10-2 that killed the Blitzball for me.
Speaking of Blitzball, I was on Twitter this morning, and I looked on there, and I had someone called Whacker following me.
Oh man.
Yeah. So I'm now being followed by one of the Blitzball champs.
You're gonna challenge him to a Blitzball match?
I think I did make a comment first thing this morning. I can't remember what I put, but
Wow.
Just watch out if he tries to recruit you for the orcs, because you know how shit they are.
do any of you guys remember the game Speedball?
I actually am not familiar with that name.
It was like it was kind of like a mix between hockey, but you're on skates.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like rugby.
Hockey is kind of like rugby as is.
Well, yeah. You're these guys. You're these guys in these like massive armor.
Mm-hmm.
You've got a goal either side of the pitch, or whatever you call it, the arena, however you want to say.
Yeah.
And you got this giant metal, what seems to be a metal ball, and you've got to carry it and sort of charge your way through to try and throw the ball and score a goal.
Okay.
It was one of my old Sega favourites when it came to a sports game.
Oh, I've actually never heard of that. See, now I'm interested. Now I'm looking it up.
It was done by, I think it was done by the Bitmap brothers. They were quite popular with regards to old games, like sort of back on the. I know they did a few Mega Drive era games. I can't remember they did anything on the Commodore 64 sort of era.
Right. Oh, I see it. Okay. Wow, it came out in 1988. That would explain. Yeah, it was like 3 years before my time.
Yeah, it's a bit of an old one.
Okay. That's going way back in terms of retro. That's going way back.
And I used to like it was Speedball 2. That was the one that I used to play a lot of.
Right.
I can't remember when that came out.
Speedball 2 came out in 1990, And they made a version on the Game Boy Advance in 2002.
It's also on the. I know it's on the Xbox Live Arcade. I haven't bought it on the Xbox Live Arcade, but I have seen it there.
I think it's on PSN.
It could be. It could be.
I think so. I have to probably see. See, there you go. Another benefit from, having an online store. A game that was released in 1988 pops up on an online store nowadays. You can't find that in stores now.
No, you have to do a lot of internet shopping to try and find things like that.
Yeah. And hope that the prices aren't jacked up.
Yeah.
I think that's another reason why Square Enix is doing another Final Fantasy VII remake, to be honest. Or re-release, excuse me.
I think what was the most shocking thing with that, when there was the first sort of speculation and sort of rumours going around that it was going to be re-released on the PC,
Mm-hmm.
the rumour was that it was going to be coming onto Steam.
Right.
And when they officially announced it, that was not the case at all.
Yeah, it was just going to be games for Windows type of thing.
You got to download it from their site.
Oh, okay. So they have the file. You have to download it from them. Okay.
Yeah, you got to buy it from the Square Enix store. But it probably wouldn't be long until someone torrents it like like normal. But
yeah, this is as per usual. There's always going to be someone who torrents a game or rips it and then puts it on a torrent site for them to download it or whatever.
Yeah.
Let's see. One game I really wish would come back that I haven't seen since last generation would be Breath of Fire.
Oh, I do. Breath of Fire 3, I think it was. I think that was a PS1 or PS2 game.
PS1.
I used to play that a lot.
Yeah, Breath of Fire 3 was amazing, especially at the time, and because it doesn't try to do the 3D graphics, which was the craze during the PS1 era,
Yeah.
it doesn't look outdated.
It's another game I really love, although they've sort of they've moved onto the Nintendo systems. Is Dragon Quest, the Dragon Quest series. I think is it 9 or 10? That was the last one that come on to PlayStation 2.
I think it was 8.
Or is it 8?
Yeah, I think it was.
Yeah, may have been 8.
Yeah, because 8 had the Final Fantasy 12 demo with
that's it. That's the one. Yeah. I never quite finished that game because someone borrowed. Well, I say someone. My brother borrowed my memory card to take round one of his friends, and had my save file on it, which was so near completion, and the memory card never came back.
Did you ask your brother about it?
Yeah.
What was the response?
He said someone must have taken it.
Oh, that's always it's always reassuring.
Yeah.
Do you ever plan on maybe redoing it or getting another memory card and doing it again, or?
Well, I've still got my PS2 plugged in, and I have got memory cards free because I ended up having to buy new memory cards for it. So, yeah, I'll give it another shot one day. I mean,
Okay.
I've looked the game itself because it's using this sort of shaded graphics, so it kind of doesn't look that dated either.
Right. The cell shading really helps in terms of aging, especially with anime-based games that came out during the PS2 era, like Dragon Ball Z Budokai. Budokai 3 was cell shaded, and with the recent announcement that they're going to make an HD re-release of it, Budokai 3 does not look aged.
That was one of the titles that was only announced. Was it this week?
Something like that, yeah, like a week or two ago. Because it was at the Japan Expo, while EVO was having their announcements. to me, it seems like games modeled around the, you could say, SNES style, or like you could say the sprite or 2D, or even, as we mentioned, cel-shaded style, are easier to bring over than a game from the PS1 era with 3D graphics. Because you can look at a game like Chrono Trigger, and it doesn't look bad now. It looks like it holds up, it looks vibrant, it looks nice. It still looks, a game that can catch your eye. Then you play something like, let's say, Resident Evil 1 or Resident Evil 2 on a PS1, the original version.
Yep.
Or as you mentioned, FF7.
Yep.
Back then, that looked fantastic. Now, the FF7 characters look like little Lego people.
Yeah. Actually, in amongst my videos, did you see the one for Urban Chaos?
I did not, actually.
Urban Chaos is another one that doesn't look good now. At the time, it looked pretty fantastic, and movements and everything else seemed quite fast and fluent. But now it seems slow, clunky. The graphics are terrible.
Right. Whereas you also played Altered Beast in your streaming for the Twitch TV account, and Altered Beast still looks. It's an arcade game. It doesn't look like it aged too much. You could say.
And I mean, it has that old, because they haven't changed it in any way, really. But it has that really, tough old game style, where you're sort of working on the basis of lives, and you used to have to, keep shoving your coins in the arcade machine just to keep yourself ticking until you reach the end boss.
Right. Yeah, I think I have Altered Beast in the Sonic Ultimate Genesis collection.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I do have Altered Beast on that. I played it like once or twice, and I'm going through it. I'm like, whoa, okay, the games were surprisingly harder back then.
Yeah. And when you used to, it was like with the old Sonic the Hedgehog and everything, like when you run out of lives and you've spent there's no saves.
No.
Some games had codes that you would type in so you can go back to that level. But if you run out of lives, the game resets and you got to start all over again.
Yeah, I hated going through that. No, I think the Sonic Ultimate Genesis collection even has that a little bit, where if you lost all your lives, you have to restart.
Yeah,
I think some games do, some games don't.
I think the Sonic allows for saves. It allows for saves, but it didn't before. So the number of times you get to the right to the final bit in the Sky Fortress, I think it was in the Sonic 1 or 2. I think I was Sonic 2, get to the Sky Fortress, and there was one bit that I always kept messing up: the jump, fall to the floor, final life, start again.
Yeah. Sonic was always a pain to just make sure you get it all right, because you would see these videos of how fast Sonic's supposed to move from point A to point B, and how it's supposed to be one fluid motion, and it's kind of like, the video is daring you, okay, you as the player, replicate that. And you just look at it and go, how are you supposed to do all that in one, movement? Figure it out.
Yeah.
Do you two feel by any chance that games going forward to this generation have been made easier compared to, let's say, the SNES era?
Yes.
Yes, that's a unanimous one. You think it's for better or for worse?
A bit of both, really. I mean, games have got bigger as well. A lot of games have got bigger. So, whereas before you'd Even though they had their little health warnings to say don't play for more than an hour without a break, you couldn't just play the old ones for an hour. You'd have to be playing it for a couple of hours just to sort of reach the end of the levels, etc.
Right.
Otherwise, you start, like I said, you start from the beginning each time. But they were more challenging. You always wanted to sort of try and progress that a little bit further all the time. Whereas now you have things like you're regenerating health from games. You have checkpoints, save points. I mean, even if you look back at Tomb Raider 1 compared to Tomb Raider 2, Tomb Raider 2 allowed you to save anywhere. Tomb Raider 1, you used to only be able to save at those blue crystals. And they weren't always in the best places.
No. I remember some of those. Some of those were like 2 or 3 segments back from where you would often die, and you'd have to replay the entire part up until the point where you died. And then if you die again, you have to do all that all over again.
Now you just cross through a checkpoint, it saves automatically, and all the enemies that you've already killed are dead, and you don't really have far to go before you get back to where you were.
Right. But at the same time, they can't make it too hard, or else some people just will look at the game and go, too hard, and they won't buy it.
Yeah, they switch off. And that's why I kind of think that's the kind of the better. They've made it easier for the better, and they're more accessible for for people. And I think where there's a lot of people sort of go for multiplayer features, death matches, etc. Like you do, like you get with your Call of Duty games, and whatever else. It's always a lot of people just sort of stick to the multiplayer elements.
Mm-hmm.
So the difficulty curve doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Michelle, anything you want to add in terms of your thoughts on like difficulty curve from back then to now?
Oh, it definitely got easier. I don't think he really argued against that. I don't even know really what to say about it. I think the whole point is games now are not just for sort of hardcore gamers, they're more sort of accessible, like you have stuff, family games and stuff like that. Like, 20 years ago, you've caught these people dead sort of playing, a video game, but now it's like, anyone can have fun with the game.
Right. It's a fair point. One thing I do also feel in terms of the difficulty curve is that some games with this generation seem to try to make up for the difficulty curve in the trophy or achievement department.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, instead of having having this game be ultra hard on normal, they make normal easy, but they make trophies and achievements for doing something ridiculous in the game. Or beat the game on, like, the hardest difficulty setting. Right? One thing...
Yeah, I think that...
Go ahead.
Okay. I think that's pretty much where they're sort of... how they're trying to sort of capture the sort of hard... what they call the hardcore gamers. Those that want to just push a game all the way. If it's a game, I mean, I find for myself when it comes to achievements, I don't always sort of go after all the after every achievement in every game that I play. But if there's a game that I really love, things like Dragon Age Origins was one of the games that I got 100% of the trophies for because I love the game so much. I played it through God knows how many times just to sort of scrape up every last point. The story didn't bore me, so I could just replay it as all the different different races of character and everything.
Right.
But some games I feel I can just play through the story. I'll maybe up the difficulty a little bit, but that I'm probably not going to go much further than that.
Right. I kind of feel the same way. If it's a game I absolutely love playing, then I will try to 100% all the achievements and trophies for it. So right now I only have 5 platinum trophies on PS3, and those 5 are games that I absolutely love playing, and I didn't find it boring to, do repetitive, you could say, nonsense during it. Like Force Unleashed 2, I love the gameplay of it. I hate the length, I hate the story of Force Unleashed 2, but the gameplay of it is phenomenal, and the graphics are phenomenal, and I felt myself drawn into playing it. But some of the trophies and achievements for it are just stupid. Like, one of it was, get 3 stormtroopers lined up, and then force grab a ball, and then throw the ball into all 3 stormtroopers, and it has to kill all 3 of them. That was the game's way of kind of giving the difficulty curve, because the Unleashed difficulty keeps everything you did from normal. So if you found all the health upgrades, all the force upgrades, all the crystals, you can go into the Unleashed difficulty with all your stuff, pretty much full. And I don't want to say you can dominate Unleashed difficulty, but you can come pretty close. So to make up for it, I came up with these weird trophies and achievements that it was kind of, there were nice little things here and there. It would be nice Easter eggs, but for it to be a trophy was kind of, I don't know, nonsensical. Like, why would it be a trophy for you to line up 3 stormtroopers and throw a ball at them?
Yeah, that was one of those games which all the regular sort of stuff that you would do, I would I'd go and collect the trophies for. But there were those little things which I tried it. It was stupid, and I sort of gave up.
Right. That was one of those games for me with Force Unleashed. As much fun as I had with the game itself, that was just one of those things where I just looked at it and went, nope, not platinuming. Okay. One thing I want to talk to you about in general is the idea of either remakes, re-releases, or compilation sets this generation. Last generation, there haven't been that many re-release games or compilation sets in terms of old school games. There were a few. Capcom made a few, Sega made a few, but it wasn't a lot. This generation, you have Marvel vs. Capcom 2 re-released. Marvel vs. Capcom Origins was recently announced. Nights into Dreams was recently announced to get a remake. Okami HD was announced. We have the DMC HD collection. Every single God of War game was remade. God of War 1, 2, and the PSP games. The Sonic Ultimate Genesis collection, which was 42 games on its own.
And have you seen the Capcom Street Fighter collection? Right,
and the Street Fighter Anniversary collection.
Yes, yeah, the massive bumper pack which contains every not every iteration of Street Fighter 2, because there's probably too many that you can fit into a box.
It's close now. For PS3 fans who want to get the Anniversary collection, the PS3 version exclusively has PS1 classic versions of Street Fighter Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, and a PSP digital download version of Alpha 3 Max, along with Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, Third Strike, Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition, and Street Fighter Cross Tekken. So it really comes close to having all of Street Fighter on that one Anniversary set, especially if you get the PS3 version.
Yeah.
So, do you feel that, can you say that this is kind of an admission of some game companies that their stuff in the past was better than what we're getting now?
It's either that or they've not got any ideas, or I'm guess in part they're just sort of trying to deal with this sort of the fan demand, etc. Trying to do a little bit of fan service or whatever with trying to release popular games. Although most people who are fans have already got should already have the games in some format or another, or multiple in terms of Final Fantasy. Sometimes it just seems like a quick buck, and some of these re-releases have actually been felt like they've been rushed. They get put out there by word of mouth, or spread over the internet as a rumor. They try and push the game to come out, and take, for example, Silent Hill collection. That was apparently I never bought the HD collection, but that was apparently full of all kinds of bugs, which they've patched this week.
Right.
Only HD remake I want is on Emusha, but I don't think that's happening. It was quite interesting because one of the guys from Capcom, new European community manager from Capcom, he asked the community what they would like to see receive a reboot, remake, and there was a lot of responses for that. So I guess it's in part people, gamers seem to want the old stuff, but at the same time complain that there's not enough new stuff, or good new stuff.
Right. It's becoming more, you could say, cash-in games rather than...
Yeah.
Like, one example you could say is look at Capcom, as you mentioned with Onimusha. As someone who's followed Capcom over the years, you could say that the games back then had more, you could say, heart into it. I don't want to sound corny, but that's what it comes off as. Like, they were willing to push out Mega Man, Mega Man X, Breath of Fire, Street Fighter. They were willing to take a risk in a market that probably didn't, know what to think about the games. But nowadays, it's more, make Resident Evil, push out what works. So where you hear Yoshinori Ono in an interview recently state that he had to pretty much beg and plead Capcom to get Street Fighter 4 to work.
Yeah.
And people were begging for another Street Fighter game all that time, in terms of, after Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, what was there left?
And Street Fighter 4 is an example of a good reboot.
Right. I absolutely love Street Fighter 4.
I mean, visually, it looks different. It looks different visually. It kind of, keeps the same 2D gameplay.
Right. It has its own changes with the focus attacks and the addition of ultra attacks along with the super moves.
I mean, and then you've got sort of people that the other company which sort of took a similar stance after Capcom had done it with Street Fighter 4, and that was with the NetherRealm Studios, and they brought back Mortal Kombat under the umbrella of just being Mortal Kombat. And they made that in a similar style where it's a 3D backdrop, 3D characters, but played in a 2D style.
Right. Which in and of itself wasn't bad. I did enjoy Mortal Kombat, and I feel the Mortal Kombat reboot gets way too much flack that it doesn't deserve. In terms of the competitive fighting game scene, Mortal Kombat's reboot was a great return to form for the series, and it needed that return to form after Mortal Kombat Armageddon and MK vs. DC Universe.
Yeah. I wasn't quite sure where they were trying to go with the Mortal Kombat series. I mean, especially on some of the latter PS2 games, where they started to try and put in some RPG elements, and it was quite strange for a fighting game to be doing it. But
right. I
mean, I guess they were trying to make it a little bit more interesting than just being a straightforward fighter. But I think people buy into that series for it being a fighter, for it being a violent fighter.
Right. That really is the main appeal of Mortal Kombat. It being, like you said, a violent fighting game, and the fatalities, and you being able to do all of that crazy stuff. And a game like Mortal Kombat vs. DC comes around and fatalities were taken out.
Yes.
Or some fatalities were edited, other fatalities weren't as, gruesome as it used to be, and the game was reduced to a teen rating. And Mortal Kombat, as we all know, is not a teen-rated game.
No, although I do remember playing as a teen.
I think we all do with Mortal Kombat 1 and 2. Especially on the SNES versions where there was no blood on the SNES version of MK1, and then MK2 came around and they added the blood back in.
Yeah, I used to go around with my friends and play it. I wasn't allowed to have it, but yeah, I used to go around with my friends to play it.
We actually had it in the house, MK1 and MK2, and I was allowed to play it when I was, I want to say, like 5 or 6, actually. I remember being allowed to play it very young, but the thing was, I knew it was just, I knew this was fantasy. I at that point, I already had the perception to go, okay, this is just video game world.
Yep.
I'm not gonna, lightning's not gonna come out of my hands. Michelle, anything you want to add in terms of the thought of remakes and re-releases constantly coming out this generation?
I think it depends on how often they remake it. Like going back to our friends at Square Enix game, it's like, how many times have they remade 4, for example?
Right.
Yeah. but they haven't remade Kingdom Hearts 1 or 2.
Well, not yet anyway. I mean, it is the 10th anniversary, let's face it, it's gonna happen sometime.
I expect him to do it just so they can lead into Kingdom Hearts 3.
I think one of the re-releases, especially when it comes to PlayStation, with the PlayStation 3 and PS2 games, is the fact that because all current gen PS3s aren't backwards compatible with the PlayStation 2 games, it gives people the opportunity to replay some of the games which they used to love playing, but they can't play on their PS3 consoles, which if they've already got rid of their their old PS2 consoles, they've either got rid of their games or they've just got games sitting there with no use at all.
Right. I still have my PlayStation 2 hooked up to my TV along with my PS3. And in another room, I have a GameCube and an N64 hooked up.
Yeah, see, everything previous to my PS2 is up in the loft.
Well,
I haven't got room to connect anything else.
I wanted to keep the N64 because I have too many, I guess you could say, fond memories of the PS2, the N64 and PS1 era, especially with some of the N64 games at the time. Like, a game like Star Wars Rogue Squadron was amazing on the N64. And then they made the GameCube version which was Rogue Squadron 2, which blew it away. And you also have games that are getting re-released again, back to the re-release part of this, on the WiiWare and the Virtual Channel, with like Pokemon Puzzle League, which was probably one of my favorite games of the N64. And stuff like that being brought out again. Super Mario 64, being, you could say, the classic that it was at the time. And it still is. It's one of those 3D games that doesn't look so bad looking back on it. What were your first generations of gaming?
Oh. Now, for me, I think one of the first things I had was, apart from those little handheld console things, we had this Tandy Pong game, which was literally the I think there was 4 games in one. There was tennis, which was your standard Pong. There was squash, which was you had the walls around.
Mm-hmm.
There was football where you had 4 of the battens, and I can't remember what the other one was. The other one maybe I think the other one was like doubles tennis or something. That was probably the first thing we had. And then there was the ZX Spectrum, Commodore 64. First console would have been the NES. Had Ataris, a couple of Ataris. There was a SNES.
Just to let you know, you're showing your age here.
And then I worked on from there.
Wow. My first console was the NES, and you're naming off Commodore 64 and Atari like, oh, I had one of these as well. I'm sitting here like, well, NES was my first one in 91, 92. Michelle, what was your first one?
Well, it was my brother's C64. It was the first one I had. Then it's like kind of shared the Mega Drive. And the first console I had myself was the original Game Boy, the brick.
Oh yeah, I still have that thing.
You can't have that without playing Tetris and having that music stuck in your head. God knows how long.
Yes. I have Tetris 2 on the Game Boy, on the original Game Boy. My original Game Boy library wasn't even that big at the time. It still isn't that big. It's just like 4 or 5 games worth. I had the Game Boy version of Mortal Kombat 2, because I was obsessed with Mortal Kombat at the time. And I had Tetris 2. I didn't get Tetris 1, but I had the second game. I had a game called Caesar's Palace on the Game Boy. And, of course, Game Boy collection, you can't go wrong with Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow.
See, as I was growing up, I didn't quite jump into the Pokemon era. I mean, it was kind of too young for me when I was growing up.
Blasphemy.
Nowadays it's not a problem. Nowadays it's not a thing. But then it's, when you're growing up, you sort of see things in a different light. But yeah, so I never quite grew up with Pokemon.
Pokemon was pretty much my addiction when I was younger. I played through Red, Blue, and Yellow, all 3, back to back. Even though Red and Blue were technically the same game, I played Red and Blue back to back. I was like, no, I must get a Dragonite in both games. Funny thing, we were talking about remakes and re-releases, and thinking back on it, Pokemon is also guilty of the same thing, but their current games are up to quality. Where they made Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green as remakes and anniversary celebrations, I believe 15th or 10th anniversary celebrations? I think 10th anniversary celebrations for the original Pokemon Red and Green in Japan. So they made Fire Red and Leaf Green. And then for the 15th anniversary, they made Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which was remakes of the Gold Silver Crystal line. And yet, every game has still been up to their quality.
Yeah, they have. I think one thing that people have wanted whenever it comes to the Pokemon games is something bigger, wasn't it? It's always been something that's moved away from the handheld. I think they did have a go at that with was it on the N64? Was it on the N64? There was a game, and again, it wasn't something which I was into.
N64 games were more meant to be, you could say, expansions on the Game Boy games.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for the N64 games, they came out with this thing called the Transfer Pack. And you would plug it into the back of the N64 controller. And on the Transfer Pack, you would put in red, blue, yellow, gold, silver, crystal into the transfer.
That's the one. Pokemon Stadium.
Yes. And after that, you would connect the Game Boy game to the N64 game, and it would read your Pokemon team. It would put your Pokemon team in the game if you wanted it to. You could read the Pokedex in the N64 game. You could see 3D models of your Pokemon. In Pokemon Stadium 2, they added a library for you to be able to look over what moves your Pokemon can learn. And this was before the internet, you could say, was such a big source for this information. Like right now, you can just go to cerebi.net and find, the move list and the move tutor and the egg moves and the egg groups and everything like that. But Pokemon Stadium 2 had it on the game, where if you had the transfer pack for Crystal, you put that into your Pokemon Stadium 2 game and it unlocked the Pokemon Crystal data. If you completed the quizzes, you unlocked the gold and silver data. So you're able to look over the move list and the move tutor stuff in your actual game without having to go to the internet. And it was very convenient at the time, but because of the growth of the internet, it's not so much a necessity for the Pokemon games to do now, but it was still a very nice thing that they did, especially back then. Then they made for the GameCube Pokemon Coliseum, which was their actual attempt at making an adventure game on a console for Pokemon. But because of the way they did it, it was very limited. Like, one of the main complaints for Pokemon Coliseum that I felt was somewhat justified was you can only capture Pokemon that are called Shadow Pokemon. That they were under some kind of taint, if I'm not mistaken. And your lead character had a device that turned a Pokeball into a Shadow Ball that captures them. And once you capture them, you're supposed to be able to purify them eventually, and as you purify them, you're able to trade them to your Game Boy Advance games, Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, Fire Red, Leaf Green, at that time. But the one thing that was very limiting about that game, when they were finally making an adventure Pokemon game, was you can only capture about 64 Pokemon.
Right.
And the Pokedex were always, 151, 152 to 252, 252 to 386, and then 386 to wherever it's at now. Whereas in this one, it's just 62 Pokemon or 64 Pokemon.
So it felt a little bit cut out there.
Right. It just felt a little, it felt a little lax. But at the same time, since you can trade these Pokemon to your Game Boy Advance games, it gave you the chance to get Pokemon you couldn't get otherwise. Like in the Game Boy Advance games, up until Fire Red and Leaf Green were released, you couldn't get Raikou, Entei, or Suicune in Ruby, Sapphire, or Emerald. This Pokemon Coliseum gave you the opportunity to capture them in the GameCube game and then transfer them to the Game Boy Advance game once you purified them. Back then, Ho-Oh was an event Pokemon outside of Gold and Silver and Crystal. And in this game, you could capture Ho-Oh, purify him, and then put him into your Game Boy Advance game. Lugia would be the Pokemon that would undergo this treatment in Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness, the sequel. So it was more or less meant to connect to your Game Boy Advance game for you to get Pokemon that you couldn't get otherwise. But at the same time, it felt, as an adventure game, it felt lacking.
Right.
For a Pokemon game. Because Pokemon games are supposed to sink in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours. But Pokemon Coliseum, you can kind of beat it in 60. It wasn't really a full title.
Yeah.
Having said that, Rose Colosseum was better than having to buy Pokemon Channel just to get Jirachi.
Yes, yes, yes. I did like that little bonus that they put in with Colosseum, where if you pre-ordered Colosseum, you would get a little mini disc that goes on your GameCube, and it had a trailer for the new Pokemon movie, but with it installed Jirachi into a connected Game Boy Advance game.
Hang on, what is this DLC?
Yes, this is DLC before DLC.
Well, now, see, this is another thing with obviously one of the issues which some people have with current generation gaming is the fact that there is the thing called DLC, meaning that developers can, in future, put things extra into the game.
Right.
Now, for most people who are PC gamer or whatever, I mean, even the Grand Theft Auto had the expansion pack, the London expansion pack, which you required the original Grand Theft Auto disc to play it.
Mm-hmm.
Now that was a kind of sort of early form of DLC. You used to have to buy, you used to go down to the shops and buy your expansion packs, which sometimes just gave you items. Take The Sims, for example. Sometimes gave you a whole new missions, new scenarios to the game. So this, it's not really anything new. It just means it comes at you from digital channels, and it means they can. A lot of developers can work on stuff and put it in there, put new stuff out there, which they wouldn't have originally had planned, or things that may have otherwise been scrapped if it was just to go onto a disc release.
Right. And a lot of things tend to get, or used to get, scrapped back in the previous generations. So, this, at least with DLC as it advanced now, gives them the opportunity to expand on something that may have been cut from the game. They can look at it and go, "We can expand on this," and then release it later.
Yeah.
But
I mean, there is always the talk of the on-disc DLC stuff. That's still a bit of a funny issue. But I think Harada had it right when he was talking about DLC for the upcoming Tekken game, and he was saying that he didn't want to do, and the producer of Dead or Alive said he didn't want to put in characters as DLC because he thinks it's unfair,
right?
Because you introduce characters for some people. And not for others who may not be able to afford to buy it, or so you're not given. They don't feel like they're getting the full product. And then there was the argument about the on-disc DLC for is it Street Fighter Cross Tekken?
Yes.
The fact that if they didn't do that, then other players wouldn't have been able to play against them because they didn't have the characters.
Right.
Because they wouldn't have had the character models loaded into their computer, although I'm sure there's been, unless of course that was all on disc DLC as well, I'm sure there's been characters introduced into games which have come fully from DLC.
Let me think. In terms of just characters introduced as strict DLC, the two games that come to mind are Mortal Kombat and BlazBlue Continuum Shift. And this is where Capcom's argument of the DLC falls apart.
Yeah.
Because BlazBlue was able to make the characters strict DLC. They were full-on DLC. But what they did was, with each patch that came out for BlazBlue Continuum Shift, they included, you could say, the footprint of each DLC character in the game, so you can still go against someone who has the DLC character, but you can't use them.
Yes.
And they added a version selector, where you could select what version of the game you wanted to play. If you wanted to play version 1, version 1.01, version 1.02, to limit, what DLC character was allowed. Like if 1.02 had, off the top of my head, I think it was Valkenheim.
Yeah.
If version 1.02 had Valkenheim, and you didn't have Valkenheim, and you didn't want to go against anyone using him, you can go back and play version 1.01 to go against just, up to Makoto as DLC. And Capcom's method of doing it was they put the entire character on the disc.
Yeah. And people hacked, like they do, people hacked the disc, found the characters.
Yeah, I don't know why Capcom was surprised that happened, considering that this isn't even the first time it happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see where they thought that would actually slide through. And then Mortal Kombat was an example of just doing it wrong. In the sense of the compatibility packs. They weren't mandatory, they were optional.
Yeah.
You had to download them yourself. The only one that was made mandatory because of fan outcry of the character was the final one for Freddy Krueger. And that's because Ed Boon heard so many people say, we're not going to download it. Why are you adding in Freddy Krueger as a DLC character in Mortal Kombat? And they just looked at it and went, okay, you'll be forced to add him then.
Yeah, was it Mortal Kombat that you got? I think was it the light version? So you just got access to play the character. So you got if you didn't want to actually buy the actual character, you download the light version of that character to then play against them.
Yes, the compatibility packs that they added.
Yeah.
And the worst part is the compatibility packs came with free costumes. And people wouldn't download it, especially the one for Freddy, because everyone has this, or everyone had this idea of, why are you adding Freddy Krueger? I'm not going to download the compatibility pack, because I don't want to see him in my Mortal Kombat game. And then NetherRealm Studios was like, okay, we'll force you then. The day Freddy Krueger came out, a mandatory patch came out. And it added Freddy Krueger's compatibility pack into your game automatically. And if you didn't download it, you couldn't go online.
Now there was one guy that used Freddy Krueger on Evo, wasn't there?
Was there? I missed the Mortal Kombat Evo tournament.
Yeah, one guy picked Freddy Krueger, and I think he went through too.
Oh wow, I have to probably catch that.
But they're saying that this year was because last year they wouldn't allow DLC characters, but this year they would.
I think it had to do with timing.
Yeah, there's been a year, so it's people have got had time to actually play against people playing those characters, and as well as even possibly try them themselves.
Right, and Freddy was just coming out at the time of Evo last year. So I think you had Kenshi, Scarlet, and Rain had been released I think a month or two earlier. So there really wasn't time to get a grasp on what they could do. So it was just a soft ban until time passed, and then they allowed them. It's weird how with older games, you could say that there are things on the disc or back on the SNES or N64 days, a cartridge. There were things on those cartridges, and people would complain that we couldn't get them because they were cut, because of production time, because of this, because of that. Okay, like the famous FF6, I believe it was FF6, the Kaiser Dragon or the Tsar Dragon rumor, and stuff that was cut from Chrono Trigger and stuff that was cut from the bigger games. But now with the technology nowadays, with DLC, stuff like that can be avoided by starting work on it on the disc and then finishing it as DLC. But the problem is that most game companies haven't exactly done that method.
I think another one of the things with the DLC is also because of restrictions in certain countries, which means they can release one product but restrict access to certain features on the product.
Mm-hmm.
which we all know that most people end up hacking their way through anyway. But I guess for the sake of it being allowed to be released in a certain area, they have to restrict certain content.
Right. Would you both agree in regards to us talking about the whole DLC issues with this generation and the workarounds and, as you said, the hacking? Would you agree that the generations in the past were much simpler than they were now?
I'd say so. I guess another thing is people had opinions, but they weren't able to express them like they can now. I mean, with the advances in internet technology and social media and everything else, people's networks are a heck of a lot bigger. Before you would, the best you would do is write to a magazine and hope that you're the one out of the 10 people that actually get published in the magazine and have your voice heard. But other than that, you pretty much were on your own.
Right.
Now people can scream out that we disagree with this, and this, which they probably would have done years ago, but they didn't have a platform to express themselves.
Michelle, anything you want to add?
I think on one hand DLC is really good because it can add a lot of extra bonus content for people who want to buy it, but at the same time, again, looking at Square Enix with the DLC for 13.2,
Yeah.
It's like they're saying, oh, it's story based, it's going to be great. It's like, if it's story based, why isn't it on the disc? Some of the DLC was really shit anyway.
Right. With this generation, it feels like they are cutting things out of games, rather than the last generations where it was legitimately, you look in the disc and it's like, wow, this wasn't finished. Imagine
now,
if it was.
I like story-based DLC if it's done well. I don't like something which is just a short scenario or something.
Right.
Take for example, Skyrim or Oblivion. They had the expansion packs, or what's now the the DLC for Skyrim Dawnguard, which are actually massive expansions to the game, as opposed to just being a tiny little add-on, which yes, it adds to the story a little bit, sort of gives you a little bit more with the character and maybe a couple of extra little features, but more often than not, the extra story content doesn't offer a lot in terms of value for what you pay.
Right. I feel that gaming in general has just become, I don't want to say overly complicated, but in the sense of back then, things were still new. People were still figuring out what worked, what didn't, what you could do, what you couldn't do, production times, what you could put in the game, and stuff like that. And also the consumers were also not as smart as they are now, in the sense of they would play the game, and then they would hear an expansion of the game, and then they would get excited. Like Street Fighter really didn't get that much flack for Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition, Turbo, Super Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2
Hyper.
Turbo, Hyper, yeah, and then Hyper Street Fighter 2 Anniversary Edition. It didn't get flack for doing it back then. But now, you try to pull that off with gamers. Gamers are more aware of what the company is going to do. So they either look at it and go, we're going to save money, wait for the next version, or what they wind up doing is they just completely get turned off by the company, which is what's happening with Capcom.
Yeah. Again, this like with regards to the fact that the social platforms, social media platforms, you can have people who report on certain things and sort of put their opinions out there, which makes people think more, and then what wouldn't have bothered them before has now become an issue because they've heard it and they've thought about it.
Right. They actually sat down and went, I paid for the same game 5 times.
Yeah.
Right. And what I find amazing is you hear also more complaints about it now, and pricing for gaming in general has gone down compared to
Yes.
what it was for the cartridges.
But I think I found some Sega Mega Drive cartridges before, which were which had their original price tags, and I think they were like $39.99 or something in pounds, which is about the same price as you'll pay for some full games today.
Wow.
You know, you wouldn't even think about it then. You'd buy it because it was a hobby, but I think also there wasn't so much saturation. There wasn't so much coming out all at once.
Right. It was just a big game here and there, and that was it.
Yeah. But now look at the September, October, November windows, and then what's now the March, the sort of late spring, late quarter one period. Those are just completely saturated with massive releases, a complete, money drainers. And then you have periods like now, which there's nothing really being released for a good few weeks.
Right. And then all of a sudden, 2-3 different games come out all at once.
Yeah. And then you throw in things like special editions and everything else, which cost even more. Right. Which you did a blog post about special editions, and I think some of which, I have actually pre-ordered 2 special editions, but you find that you end up just spending so much money on things, and sometimes although you buy the special editions, and I've been a fool for it myself, and buy special editions, the only thing you have to do is play the actual game, which you could just get standard for a lot cheaper. However, you just sit there and think, oh, well, it's only if I want all that extra content, or a statue that won't fit anywhere.
Yeah, I know that feeling. The thing with collector's editions lately is, going back to comparing, past to now, is that, as I put in the blog post, in the past, a collector's edition was a collector's edition. If something had a collector's edition, it was big. It was going to be something that's in the game, or gave you something cool, or if it didn't give you something big, the pricing was only about $10 more. So,
and it was special, and it was very limited.
Right. Like, the Ultimate Spider-Man Collector's Edition on the PS2 was, it added a few things in the game itself, just a few gallery things, added a few making-of videos, including the G4 episode of Behind the Scenes for Ultimate Spider-Man, and it came with a comic, and it was autographed by Brian Michael Bendis, the writer of Ultimate Spider-Man, and it had his signature printed on the casing. That's a neat, collector's edition for a Spider-Man fan.
Yeah.
And then you have, if you want to go back, further down the line, you had NES, where the first print of Legend of Zelda cartridges were gold. The special gold cartridges of Legend of Zelda.
I do remember those.
Right. Nowadays, it's, 5 special editions are releasing in a month.
And sometimes it's not on that special a game, but it's hyped up to be such a big game.
Right, and they just decide to, do collector's edition.
Yeah. I said 2 games, and it's actually 3 that I've booked special editions for. I just remember Ni no Kuni.
Ah, okay. I have several. I don't have a count on how many. Off the top of my head, both Arkham Asylum, Arkham City, Gran Turismo 5, Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, Mass Effect 3, Catherine.
Oh, well, these are ones that you had bought. I've got a few that I had bought, but ones that I've pre-ordered for coming releases. I've got 3 on the go.
Okay. Do I? I don't have any. I have one pre-ordered collector's edition, and that's Darksiders 2.
That's quite a good. If yours is the same as what we've got, with the mask thing with it. statue.
Yeah, I believe so. It's the same thing with the mask statue and the little what's it called? The new added dungeon that they threw in.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the same one. And I haven't pre-ordered DOA 5 Collector's Edition yet. I really should, but it's GameStop.
Yeah, that's the only ones that are doing it for you guys, aren't they?
Yes, it is, and it's disappointing.
We've got a choice of 3.
Which 3?
I'm trying to think. I think it's Zavi, The Hut, and Shop 2.
Okay.
Nino Kini was... I think that was available in Shop 2. And then the Tekken We Are Tekken edition, I pre-ordered. That was from Game. I think they've got the special edition there.
Right. This leads me to another topic in regards to nowadays compared to retro.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of store exclusives really went through the roof.
I don't like that.
You're completely against store exclusives.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I don't like to be told where. There's certain shops which I like to buy from. I don't like to be told, especially if they're a big enough store that they should get a supply of special editions of particular games.
Right.
I don't see why I should be told where I should buy them from.
Right. That's a good point. Michelle, anything you want to throw in on that one?
Never mind store exclusives, I'm still pissed off about region exclusives. I mean, I can understand why for sort of games are like huge release, you don't get like Western release, but it's a bit too important. Like, for example, Warriors Orochi 3, the treasure box for that cost me about 100.
Michelle, we can barely hear you right now.
Huh? Really? There shouldn't be a problem. Is that any better?
A little bit.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. Okay, you were saying? Sorry about that.
It's like, for Warriors Orochi 3, the treasure box cost me I think about 110, 120. And it's like, you'll never see the sort of... I mean, I know Tecmo Koei are good at sort of giving away the stuff to get the treasure boxes, but it's not the same as having like the whole thing there bundled.
Right.
Well, Tecmo Koei are actually quite... I mean, okay, they do the select store thing, which, is the sort of thing I don't like, but they're quite good with regards to their collector's editions, especially when it comes to them being limited. When it came to the Ninja Gaiden box set, that big box that you got with the Ninja Gaiden set, that was very limited in number, and they were sold out. So sold out so fast. So you think so therefore if you bought it, you've got something kind of special. As opposed to I go into my local store and I can still see Skyrim special editions on the shelf.
Right.
So that so things like that. They must have put out so many copies of those games.
Right. Sometimes they come out with bigger quantities of those games because of it being such a big release.
Yeah.
I want to make sure, but at the same time, other companies use that expected quantity of the game and go, let's lower it a little, and actually make a limited edition limited.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, as I mentioned in my blog post with Bulletstorm, I got Bulletstorm a year and a half late, thereabouts. I am looking at my box and it says Bulletstorm Limited Edition.
Yeah.
I've never seen a regular copy of Bulletstorm.
I don't recall seeing many. When I went to the game store when I finally bought it, because I was a bit late to the party as well. And yeah, I think there were maybe 3 copies of the special edition to 1 box of the normal edition.
Right. I've gone to PC Richards and Sons. I've gone to Toys R Us. I've gone to GameStop. You know, even though I'm adverse to buying from GameStop, I've gone to it from time to time. And I've seen Bulletstorm, and I've never seen a regular copy of the game. All I've seen were the limited editions.
So when it's still in line with the sort of limited collector's editions and even re-releases.
Mm-hmm.
Where do you kind of stand when it comes to DVD releases? When it's maybe anime series and stuff, because a lot of those are now sort of trying to come back re-released on Blu-ray. So a HD upgrade on the on an original title. Where do you kind of stand with things like that?
I'm normally fine with it if they do a decent enough job on the remastery. Like, for instance, Yu Yu Hakusho. Yu Yu Hakusho's Blu-ray remastery looks amazing. It really looks like a modern style... I don't want to say modern style, but the graphics of the anime actually look better than they did back then. There's a noticeable difference in terms of the Blu-ray release compared to the former DVD releases. That being said, I also find it kind of hurts those who have the collection already.
Yeah.
Like, I had the entire Yu Yu Hakusho collection on DVD, but I'm tempted to go for the Blu-ray sets. So what do I do with the DVD collection? You know, that becomes one of the, you could say, one of the sticking points for anyone who decides to re-release anime or manga, anime or series somewhere down the line, or even manga, because Viz likes doing the big, as they call the big volumes, which is volume 1, 2, and 3, and 4, 5, and 6 together, and they've been doing it with Dragon Ball. I think they did it with Rurouni Kenshin. So, I feel it hurts their established fan base, but at the same time, anyone who doesn't have it now has an upgraded, brand new version to look toward. And in the case of Yu Yu Hakusho, some of the things were redubbed. Like, one character's voice, they said, was redubbed. Same voice actor, but redubbed to make him sound more in line with his character.
Right.
And another character entirely was completely fixed. Because in the original dub, his name was wrong. And because of that, they got the name right in the re-release, and every single line referring to that character, and even the character himself, were entirely redubbed.
Now, I remember they did, and I've got it, the Ghost in the Shell, they did 2.0, which was basically a re-release of the first Ghost in the Shell game, where they had different voice actors in there. Right. And I think they did the same with the standalone complex when they released the standalone complex in the two different packs. You had the full series, which I've got the full series, which I can't remember how many DVDs are in each.
8.
Yeah. And then they released them in a sort of compact version where it all sort of flows in almost like a feature-length, 2 feature-length films. I think one was in a blue box, one was in an orange box. Just trying to remember if they were. I don't think they were called standalone complex. I think the one was called The Laughing Man, which covers the Laughing Man story. I can't remember what the other one was called.
I know there's Ghost in the Shell, which is the original movie.
Yep.
There's Ghost in the Shell 2 Innocence.
Yep.
Which was the second film. There's
Yep.
Standalone Complex 1. There's Standalone Complex Second Gig.
Yep.
And then there's Standalone Complex Solid State Society.
Yep.
And after that, I am not sure.
They did. I'll have to take a look. Google search.
Trying to find. All I found were those in terms of anime. And the manga, of course, is different, Ghost in the Shell manga, Ghost in the Shell 2, Man-Machine Interface, and Ghost in the Shell 1.5, Human Error Processor.
Mm-hmm. That's the manga.
One thing I do like in terms of if they ever remake an anime is if they take a cue from Fullmetal Alchemist. In terms of remaking or re-releasing an anime. Because they made the original Fullmetal Alchemist in 2003. And then at around episode 30 or so, they started going into its own story. And then a few years later, they announced Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood, which they announced will be in line with the manga. And for certain anime, I wish they did more of that, like, for instance, Rurouni Kenshin. Rurouni Kenshin's entire final arc was filler. So I really hope one of these days that we see a Kenshin remaster or re-release, and they go on to the actual final arc of the manga and erase Samurai X from existence, please. Just erase that from existence. I mean, I wasn't even... I watched Samurai X, I wasn't even sad watching it, I was angry. That's how bad it was to the Kenshin series, in my opinion. Michelle, what do you think about anime getting different re-releases and Blu-ray HD remasters?
I mean, I'm all for Blu-ray remasters, because especially for like the older series, but I think it just depends, like, if they think it's going to sell well or not, to be honest.
Right.
Because it kind of has a similar thing to, like what companies are doing, re-releasing the games in their sort of HD remasters. I guess that they're aimed at the fans, so that's where their sort of consumer focus is mostly lying. Is for those fans with that little bit of nostalgia to try, go and make a purchase on something which they used to love playing, but with maybe modernized controls or nicer looking visuals, etc.
Right. And in terms of anime, it's nicer looking visuals.
Extra, you usually get little extra features, little extra, reels or whatever, some shorts or makings of or something, things along those lines.
Right. And going back in line of what we were talking about, something getting too many re-releases, we can point that to Toei Animation and, in some cases, Funimation, thanks to Dragon Ball Z. You can make the case of it sometimes getting too many reiterations and re-releases.
Now, when it comes to that over here, we don't get watered down with it all. We don't get everything thrown at us. I think I mentioned in the previous podcast, we only just got release of the series of the very first Dragon Ball Z series as a box set.
Right.
We never had access to that before. It was always a case of having to import it from America or something. So for us, we haven't, and again the same sort of things when it comes to. I mean, I'm quite fond of the DC Universe animated series and things like that, and I had to import some of those from America because we don't get the release on the big box sets, which kind of sucks.
Yeah.
So we don't really feel that we're getting swamped with constant re-releases of certain things.
Okay. In America, we really did get bogged down with Dragon Ball Z a lot to a certain point, because we received the original releases on VHS, because Dragon Ball Z was coming out at a time when Yes, for anyone who's listening to this and you don't know, there was something called a VHS or a cassette player before CD players and DVD players.
Yeah, it came out in like 1989 or something.
Right. But before, Dragon Ball Z was coming out during the time of the VHS, and then after the VHS started getting phased out, they re-released everything on DVD. Okay, sensible transition. VHS to DVD, go from there. But then, a problem came in regards to the earlier arcs. Whereas the earlier arcs were, either dubbed by Pioneer, so it was their distribution rights, the Ocean dub, or, you had a hard time finding, like, the Trunks Saga or the Cell games or different arcs like that, and they had to get re-released again. Then, later on down the line, you would have, for us, we had the Orange Bricks in 2005, thereabouts. Whereas now, you're just now getting the Orange Bricks. But we had them for a while. And it was being released as, a remaster of Dragon Ball Z. See Dragon Ball Z as originally intended, as you've never seen it before. Funimation remastered all the visuals and the graphics and the animation and, to pretty much appease the fan base to see something that didn't look like it came from the 80s. They wanted to see it look newer, more vibrant, blah blah blah. So Funimation released it, seasons 1 through 9, Orange Bricks. Then they came out with finally releasing and getting the rights to the Dragon Box, which was the Japanese remastery of Dragon Ball Z. And Funimation finally got the rights to release all the Dragon Box sets. So already that's 3 re-releases. The DVD re-release, which was logical. The Orange Bricks, which was alright. It was an upscale remastering. And then the Dragon Boxes, which were the original Japanese remasters that were done several years after the series was finished. And in many people's cases were the best releases of Dragon Ball Z. Then you also had the Dragon Ball Z quote-unquote Ultimate Uncut Editions, which were episodes 1 through 64, all redone and redubbed in Funimation style. So you pretty much get rid of the Ocean dub, over 9,000, and Bardock was a very genius scientist. All those stupid Ocean dub mistakes. Funimation decided to redub episodes 1 through 64 and release them as the Ultimate Uncut Edition. And at the time, Cartoon Network got exclusive rights to air them as the pre-Adult Swim block. They were aired at 10:30. So that's another semi-re-release, because they stopped at episode 64.
See, one thing over here, one thing we get swamped with constant re-releases of. Every single time there's a new film out, would be the James Bond box sets. Every single time there's a new James Bond film, there's a new box set which contains all the films released so far.
Well, Bond is European.
Yeah.
I think we've only gotten, I want to say 2 re-releases of the Bond sets. Oh, actually 3. VHS, DVD, Blu-ray. And I think each one has added, the missing movies between each release. Like, if the VHS set came out some time ago, the DVD set will include the movies from 97 to 2003. And then the Blu-ray release is going to include Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace.
Yeah, I think the last the box that I bought was and it was quite expensive. I think it was about £100 odd, £100 odd pound. It was all the films up to what was the last one that Brosnan did? The one with Madonna in it.
The last one,
Is that Die Another Day?
I think so. Yes.
Because it was all excluding that. It was all excluding that one, but the box came with a slot, an empty slot for that DVD when it got released.
Right.
Wouldn't buy a box set of that afterwards. But I get, the same sort of thing when it comes to the Dragon Ball Z. I mean, would you go back and buy, rebuy all the extra editions of the same thing that you've already got.
Right, and Funimation just almost didn't seem to get it, and then they would be dubbing Dragon Ball Kai, which was in and of itself an official remake and re-release of Dragon Ball Z, shortened to get rid of the filler. And Japan also apparently voiced its displeasure because Dragon Ball Z Kai was later cancelled after the Cell Saga. And while Funimation was releasing Dragon Ball Z Kai, then they released Dragon Ball Z Blu-ray level 1.1. And you're cannibalizing yourself by releasing an official remake with your own Blu-ray remastery of it.
It's a kind of similar, kind of how Capcom kind of annoyed a lot of people with regards to their Street Fighter series, Street Fighter 4, because of how quickly it took them to release the special edition, the special arcade editions and whatever afterwards.
Right.
And when it came to I think the worst one had to be, and what really caused an uproar was the Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3 when that was announced, because it hadn't even been a year.
It hadn't even been.
It'd only been a few months, hadn't it, since release, and they then talk about releasing an Ultimate Edition.
So many people were disappointed on that one. It was announced this time last year, Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, and the game got released like March or something.
Right, it was released March. March. And then 3 months later, an Ultimate Edition was announced.
Yeah,
and
it didn't take long before that actually came out.
Nope, it was released in December that year.
Yeah.
And then people who bought the Collector's Edition, I'm raising my hand right now, felt absolutely gutted because they spent an extra $10, $20 on the Collector's Edition for the comic, for the steel case, for the code for Jill and Shumagoroth. And first off, Jill and Shumagoroth came out low tier as characters, so them being DLC kind of hurt.
Yeah.
And then the Ultimate Edition comes out, and it's like, whoop, there you go.
Yeah, I think that was one of the biggest mistakes that was made. I couldn't exactly say it was. It probably wasn't the developer or producer's fault. It's more so more so Capcom as a publisher, who they probably they knew that such a game was there, but would have been ready just to put it out just to make another load of money.
Right. Capcom gave several reasons why they did the Ultimate release, but nobody buys any of the reasons because their reasons keep changing from interview to interview.
Yeah, I mean there were things like balancing and which in Street Fighter they did that as a free patch. Street Fighter 4.
And Strider wouldn't fit. Was another famous one. Strider just doesn't fit the style of game Marvel vs. Capcom 3 is. And in Ultimate MVC 3, he is the first character announced.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the one that really upset gamers was when they said that it was because of the earthquake and tsunami situation in Japan, which in and of itself could be understandable. But at the same time, when your excuses were flip-flopping 5-6 different times, and that's the one that gets stuck on, it doesn't look good.
No. And I won't even talk about your gripe.
Which gripe?
The re-release of a certain game.
Oh.
Yeah.
See, I want. Okay. All I will say is this: I would like if they handle this re-release in the sense of spreading it out to everyone, but at the same time, it's kind of, you know, it's one of those things where I don't want to, say too much about it because I don't want to come off as sounding bitter about it or anything.
Mm.
But at the same time, it's kind of off how they did it. Like, I really want to see if they put that content as downloadable content for PS3 or 360 and go from there.
I have a feeling they'll be more likely to release a different version of it as opposed to putting a DLC in there.
Right.
Because they may have actually had to change things that are on the disc.
Right.
Some of the program that's actually on the disc that you won't get on the on DLC.
It's true enough. To accommodate all the changes.
Yeah.
Which also,
because there's some pretty big changes.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few of the things that they changed, which leads to another comparison between back then and now, where back then they would have to release at all times an entirely separate game if they wanted to expand on it.
Yep.
Nowadays, it's you download it, or
Yeah.
some companies still do the disc-based expansion, but it's so rare now. And game companies are relying on you to have an internet connection to download expansions for their games.
Which isn't also wrong, as seeing as most people do have internet connections, and very few people who don't.
True enough. But not everyone's internet connection is consistent. I've experienced.
Especially not if you're in the UK.
Yeah. I've had experience with bad internet connection too, so it's not just UK, it's here in America too.
We should just be glad O2 don't have much internet, I don't think.
Who's that? Sorry.
What was that?
O2, you know about O2?
Oh, yeah. See, I was actually one of the ones that actually lost my connection for yesterday and part of today.
Why? What happened?
Network went down.
Oh.
So I had no phone signal on my mobile.
How'd it go down?
There was some error with their systems, with one area in their systems.
Okay. Wow.
And it knocked them out for a day and a half. They handled it really well on Twitter though. So.
Oh, at least that. See, this is another, past versus present idea. Do we want to become a fully digital gaming network, or was the previous generation of handling gaming better in regards to the discs and the re-releases and, multiple games coming out of the same type and of the same game, but just expanding on it further?
I mean, also, how do people feel about being able to actually get in touch and actually talk to the people that made the game? I mean, that's another big thing that's changed.
Right.
Before you'd just see a name and or maybe a photograph in a box, or wait till it popped up on the screen after you completed the game, and that's about as close as you'll get to knowing who the developers were.
Right.
Now you see them all flocking to social media, and you can ask them questions, or you can find information as to why they've done certain things or whatever.
Right, and then talk to them over Twitter, and even get your questions answered over Twitter, and even some feedback.
Yeah.
And back then it was more, you
buy the game and you just accept it.
Right. Or you'd have to wait until a convention to see the person.
Yeah.
And now they're readily accessible within arm's reach via Twitter.
Yeah. I mean, we didn't really get over here. I mean, you guys had the conventions and things a lot more than we did, and we had. I don't think we really had any gaming conventions over here. And I know Michelle definitely wouldn't have up in Scotland. and I don't think they still do up in Scotland.
I can think on the top of my head, there's no gaming conventions. There's probably like one anime convention and probably one sort of sci-fi one that I can think of. That's kind of it.
In America, we still get conventions, but the big convention, E3, has been downsized. I forgot when. I think 3-4 years ago was when E3 was getting downsized. And it went from a general everyone can enter event to media and pass only.
At the same time, though, you guys still have like the big cons like Comic-Con and all that and stuff.
Yeah.
You don't get that.
Yeah, we still have the Comic-Cons and stuff. And we had Anime Expo a week or two ago.
Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con, which is going on now, is one of the things that I would love to do.
Right. I'd love to do New York Comic-Con, because that's around where I live anyway, so.
Now, see, I have family out there. I could head. I could make a trip.
Well, that would be cool if you could be able to come out here and see the Comic-Cons and check them out. I've yet to see a Comic-Con, but I would like to.
What we have over here, I mean, while they're generally a lot smaller than what I've seen from pictures and stuff, what you guys have, they're still reasonably good. From some of the ones, especially I think MCM's one of the good ones. It sort of covers a wide aspect of anime and Japanese culture and gaming all in one.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then we have things like Kapow, which covers a lot of actual comic books, plus gaming in there as well.
Right, that's true, and that sounds pretty cool.
So I think we better wrap this one up.
Yeah, I'm starting to notice the timer. We're at the 2-hour mark of this episode, so this is going to be a pretty long episode. And we barely even scratched the surface of what we could talk about in terms of retro versus present, and maybe even the future of gaming and anime. And we still have many different subjects to talk about if we wanted to do another retro episode in the future. So be on the lookout for that. And also, don't be...
Maybe some of our listeners can send their thoughts in, and if they wanted us to cover topics and give us a little bit of feedback.
Right. You can reach us at Twitter at WeAreGamers or our Tumblr, gamers.tumblr.com. Gamers is spelled GAMRS. So if any of you have any suggestions, any listeners have anything you want us to cover or talk about in future episodes or even related to this episode, feel free to send any suggestions in or any questions in. But as we stand now, this is Lawrence, Rident, Michelle will be signing off now. Justin was gone spending some time with his family. We wish him well, and we hope to have him on next time with us as usual. But for now, this is the Gamers Podcast signing off.